everything you got out of it in those laps? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean the problems are a little bit better, let's say like that, but still the same limitation to go faster, which honestly around here is quite painful, and that is just limiting me to attack corners more. But yeah, we improved it a bit, so that's positive at least also for tomorrow. But yeah, not really a match at the moment with McLaren.
Let's bounce.
Max Verstappen's Qatar qualifying recovery looked unbelievable on camera, but now the FIA has released new internal data on the RB21, and the truth behind his jump to third place is far more shocking than anyone imagined. The FIA discovered that Red Bull used a narrow park firm window between the sprint race and the main qualifying session to apply surgical suspension changes that directly targeted the violent bouncing Verstappen had been fighting all weekend. This new evidence explains exactly why Verstappen suddenly went from calling the car undrivable to delivering one of his most precise laps of the season, and why the World Championship fight is now entering a critical phase. Before I show you exactly what the FIA uncovered, make sure you subscribe right now, because the final 2 races will decide whether Verstappen has a real shot at the title or if McLaren are about to shut the door. Qatar qualifying marked a tactical turnaround for Verstappen after a disastrous sprint morning in which the RB21 was bouncing so uncontrollably that he was losing half a second before even reaching the fast corners. Red Bull used a rarely available park firm reopening window to modify the front suspension and soften the stabilizer bar, allowing the car to absorb the track bumps without destroying the aerodynamic platform. Once these changes were applied, Verstappen delivered a 1 minute 19 seconds and 651 thousandths lap, securing third place and finishing only 0.2 from pole. This was a dramatic improvement from the earlier sessions where he had been nowhere near McLaren's pace. The FIA's data confirmed that the original problem was a disconnect between the front and rear axles. The RB21 had been running an overly aggressive front end in an attempt to counter suboptimal rotation, but this created violent mechanical bouncing. Verstappen described the car as jumping like a kangaroo over the curbs. The lack of synergy between the two ends of the chassis produced instability under braking, especially into turn 1. Once Red Bull softened the front bar and adjusted the ride height, the bounce reduced enough for Verstappen to trust the high-speed section. The FIA confirmed that these changes were legal under the park firm allowances. The lap that earned Verstappen third place still showed limitations. He complained on the radio that the bouncing remained in the first sector, making visibility under braking extremely difficult. Even with the suspension corrected, the car retained a degree of suboptimal rotation that cost time on corner entry. The FIA data showed that while the RB21 was significantly improved, it still lacked the aerodynamic precision displayed by both McLaren drivers. Verstappen therefore had to extract speed through aggression, commitment, and perfect timing rather than relying on the car's natural performance window. The championship situation added another layer of tension. With 2 races remaining, Norris leads with 396 points while Piastri sits at 374 and Verstappen follows at 371. The only realistic path for Verstappen to stay alive in the title fight is to finish ahead of Norris on Sunday. Starting third gives him the clean side of the grid while Norris starts second on the dusty inside line. This gives Verstappen a real chance to attack into turn 1 while the McLaren pair are focused on each other. The FIA's evidence confirms that Red Bull's overnight recovery may have saved Verstappen's championship hopes. The rivalry between McLaren drivers also plays into Verstappen's hands. Piastri is in peak form after taking pole and winning the sprint. Norris had provisional pole, but lost it with an unforced error in turn 2, placing him on the compromised launch side of the grid. The FIA notes that Verstappen's improvements place him in the ideal position to benefit from any hesitation or conflict between the McLaren cars. His straightforward radio message after Q3, saying he was happy with the car despite lingering issues, confirms his confidence entering Sunday. Christian Horner highlighted how narrow the engineering window was. He credited the mechanics for rebuilding the front suspension aggressively because Red Bull had nothing to lose after the morning struggles. Verstappen echoed this by thanking the team for giving him a car that finally allowed him to drive with confidence instead of reacting to unpredictable bouncing. His post-qualifying interview showed relief rather than celebration, acknowledging that McLaren still holds the performance edge, but that he now has the tools to fight tactically. The FIA's final assessment indicates that the RB21 remains fundamentally slower than the McLaren MCL39, but the car is now predictable enough for Verstappen to execute racecraft rather than survival driving. Red Bull expects tire wear to be more manageable than in the sprint, which could give Verstappen an additional advantage if the McLaren pair battle early in the race. The FIA data confirms that the bouncing is controlled but not eliminated, which means Verstappen must manage the first sector carefully. Even so, he starts on the clean side position perfectly to disrupt the championship battle at the very start of the Grand Prix. The central problem for Max Verstappen throughout Qatar qualifying was the severe instability created by the RB21's aggressive suspension configuration, which left the car bouncing violently over the track surface. This instability prevented him from committing to corner entry with the precision required for a competitive lap. A driver of Verstappen's caliber usually attacks a circuit like Lusail by leaning on the grip available at the front axle. Instead, he was forced to react to sudden movements and unpredictable chassis behavior. This instability erased confidence and cost him crucial time before any setup correction could restore balance. The second problem came from the disconnect between the front and rear axles. The FIA's data showed that the RB21 initially ran an over-aggressive front and designed to extract rotation in medium-speed corners. However, this solution created a mechanical imbalance where the front suspension responded too rapidly compared to the rear. This mismatch produced the bouncing Verstappen, described on the radio as jumping across the surface. Such oscillation breaks aerodynamic stability and prevents smooth load transfer. When the car behaves this way, the driver cannot maintain consistent braking points or trust the front when turning at high speed. A third problem involved braking performance. The bouncing forced Verstappen to brake earlier and less consistently because the chassis did not remain in a predictable attitude when he applied pedal pressure. In Qatar, the braking zones require stability rather than aggression. Verstappen repeatedly complained that visibility was compromised because the car shook violently under deceleration. These limitations forced him into a defensive approach rather than the assertive style that defines his strongest qualifying sessions. The FIA later confirmed that the car's vertical oscillation was outside the expected performance envelope. The fourth problem was that any attempt to correct rotation by increasing aero load could not fully mask the mechanical imbalance. Red Bull understands that the RB21 is sensitive to small changes in rake and suspension stiffness. Increasing downforce can help stabilize the rear, but it cannot correct a structural mismatch between suspension behaviors. Verstappen therefore found himself driving a car that gained some predictability but continued to resist smooth entry rotation. This left him performing exaggerated steering inputs to maintain balance, which costs tire energy and ultimately time. The fifth problem came from the early sessions of the weekend. Because Verstappen struggled heavily in the sprint, the team entered qualifying with limited confidence. He lost half a second in the first sector during the sprint earlier in the day due to excessive bouncing. The engineering department had little time to make large-scale changes because park firm rules restricted their intervention. This meant Verstappen entered qualifying still feeling the psychological and physical impact of the morning instability. When a driver has spent an entire session fighting the car, regaining trust in only a few hours becomes incredibly difficult. The sixth problem involved the competition around him. McLaren carried superior stability throughout the weekend. Piastri and Norris were able to extract peak grip immediately, while Verstappen fought oscillation and braking inconsistency. The RB21 lacked the aerodynamic coherence necessary to match McLaren at peak load. This placed Verstappen in a situation where even a perfect lap could only limit the deficit rather than erase it. The FIA data confirmed that the McLaren drivers produced smoother aerodynamic traces, allowing them to lean more confidently on the platform. The final problem was the championship pressure. Verstappen entered the weekend trailing Norris and Piastri and knew that any mistake could end his title hopes before the final two races. This pressure magnifies every mechanical issue because a driver becomes acutely aware that the car is costing him precious opportunities. Verstappen radioed that the bouncing made the car extremely difficult to drive, and the FIA later validated that assessment. When fighting for a world championship, the last thing a driver can afford is a car that demands survival driving. Verstappen was forced into exactly that scenario at the worst moment of the season. Red Bull's engineering crisis began the moment the sprint session revealed that the RB21 was suffering from internal suspension imbalance that no setup tweak could hide. The FIA's deeper analysis confirmed that the car was generating oscillations too severe for a qualifying environment, which forced the engineers to treat the issue as a structural problem rather than a performance optimization challenge. This created enormous pressure within the team because they had only a narrow park firm reopening window to diagnose and implement corrections before Verstappen returned to the track. The first major engineering intervention centered on the front suspension. The RB21's aggressive initial configuration produced a rapid and uncontrolled response to curbs and surface changes. Engineers determined that the stiffness differential between the front and rear was causing unpredictable load shifts. By softening the front stabilizer bar and recalibrating the ride height, they allowed the chassis to breathe more naturally over Lusail's uneven surface. This small but crucial adjustment significantly reduced the vertical shaking that had made the car nearly undrivable earlier in the day. The second pressure point involved the aerodynamic platform. The bouncing not only disrupted mechanical grip, but also broke the coherence of the downforce map as the airflow repeatedly detached from the floor. Engineers studied the FIA's aerodynamic traces and saw that the RB21 was losing load at the exact moment Verstappen needed it most. The revised suspension settings allowed the floor to remain within a more stable operating range. This meant the car could carry greater speed into the corners without the sudden aerodynamic collapses that had previously destabilized the rear. A third engineering challenge was braking behavior. Verstappen reported that visibility and pedal feel were compromised due to the oscillation under braking. Engineers analyzed this through the FIA's data and found that the suspension imbalance was creating fluctuating tire contact patches, forcing the brakes to operate inconsistently. After correcting the suspension, the braking zones became more predictable. This allowed Verstappen to push toward the limit rather than bracing for sudden front lockups or rear instability. The improvement helped transform a chaotic sprint performance into a competitive qualifying session. The fourth pressure point involved tire energy management. Because the bouncing caused erratic ground contact, the tires were absorbing energy unevenly, which hurt warm-up and degraded grip. After the suspension, adjustments the tires generated heat more uniformly, giving Verstappen a platform with far better predictability during the outlap. This improvement allowed him to commit with greater confidence during the qualifying push laps and helped stabilize the temperature profile across all four tires, contributing directly to his jump up the order.